Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and the one and only Mercy Maroki. We're here all the way through until midday with a show stacked full of all of today's big stories, lots of discussion as well, and the issues that you care about.
Yes, so make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on gbviews@gbnews.uk. The email there on the screen, and we'll be reading those out throughout the show. But first, let's give you the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. Rising wages, more NHS funding and regional transport investment. That and more will be revealed in the budget this afternoon. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, will announce a stronger UK economy of the future. NHS Test and Trace has failed its main objective to enable people to return to normal life, and it risks wasting public money. That's according to MPs. A report by the Public Accounts Committee say despite investing £37 billion on Test and Trace, it hasn't worked. They report that only 14% of nearly 700 million lateral flow tests actually had their results reported. The Queen will not attend the COP26 Climate Change Summit. The monarch had been due to travel to Scotland on Monday, but now will record a speech later this week that will be played out at the conference. A palace spokesman said that Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception. The Queen is following medical advice to rest and carry out only light duties and remains in good spirits. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters are going to be sent out this week, inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Well, since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs for this age group through the National Booking Service at local sites. Water companies will now have a legal duty to reduce the impact of sewage discharges from storm overflows. Last week, the government voted against an amendment that would hold water firms legally responsible for polluting waterways. Well, public anger and the House of Lords backing the amendment forced a government U-turn. You're up to date. I'll have more on all of our top stories at 10 o'clock. But for now, back to Patrick and Mercy.
Yes, very good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. And as ever, we've got a show stacked full of all the biggest guests, the biggest topics, and stuff to get you really talking. So here's what's coming up.
Yes, it's the long-awaited budget day today. We'll be looking ahead at what we can expect from the Chancellor, finding out what you would like to see, and we'll bring you live coverage of the budget from the House of Commons a bit later on.
Yes, you lucky people. Now, in a very much a segue, some lesbians apparently have spoken out about claims of threats of violence they have faced for admitting that they are not attracted to transgender women. We'll be picking our way through that minefield with co-founder of a lesbian activist group shortly to see where this intimidation is really coming from.
Yes, and the Public Accounts Committee, which examines the value for money of government projects, says the £37 billion Test and Trace programme has not achieved its main objective. We'll be speaking with Labour MP Dame Meg Hillier, who chairs the Public Accounts Committee, at 10 o'clock. We have all that coming up and much more across the programme. And as usual, you can get in touch with us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his view on the Queen and COP26.
Can we all just leave the Queen alone? Unfortunately, our dear Queen is clearly a bit under the weather. She spent a night in hospital for tests, and now she's not going to attend COP26 on the advice of her doctor, who wants her to rest. Look, you can't blame the Queen for not wanting to go to Scotland and listen to Sturgeon and co. give speeches pretending to care about climate change. At the end of the day, if I wanted to listen to a dumpy redhead talk about things I didn't care about, I'd buy tickets to an Elton John concert. It's been a massive year for the Queen for all the wrong reasons. Prince Andrew, her favourite child, apparently has, well, you know. Prince Harry essentially stabbed her in the back by finding freedom and somehow navigating his way out of his gold-plated cage and into the arms of Oprah alongside his wife, who essentially called the royal family racist. And then, of course, Prince Philip, her husband of 73 years, sadly passed away. Her rock, her stalwart, the man who dutifully always walked just one step behind her, half of the nation's best ever double act. And can I just make this point as well? She's 95 years old. 95. I'll be dead by then, clearly. And how sprightly will our royal correspondents be? What will they be doing at 95? I can't believe she's in such fine fettle for her age. I find it a bit loathsome that so many of the usual types are using her illness like some kind of feeding frenzy. How ill is she? Is she dying? Well, why don't you tell us that she was in hospital? Yes, that's right, I'm talking about Nicholas Witchell, Mr Angry from the BBC. He kicked off because he wasn't informed about the fact that she was unwell, apparently. Well, I'm not surprised. Prince Charles famously said, "I can't bear that man, he's so awful, he really is." I couldn't possibly comment. But most of these royal correspondents essentially engage in legalised stalking, don't they? They just follow the royals around like posh leeches, desperate for any kind of information. And then when they are called upon, it's always useless, isn't it? Well, what will the Queen be doing now, Nicholas? Well, if I know the Queen like I know the Queen, which is not at all, she'll be sitting in her morning room, dark green curtains, having a cup of tea, 2 sugars, of course, just like her mother, surrounded by her favourite corgi called Whisper. Come on, mate. They're all just absolutely blagging it, aren't they? Our Queen ascended to the throne at just 25 years old. She's our longest ever serving monarch. She served in the Auxiliary Territorial Service during the war. She's guided us through the Troubles. She presided over decolonisation, devolution, Brexit, Diana's death and much, much more. I think the hysteria about her health is absolute nonsense. She's supposedly delivering a virtual address via video link at the COP26 conference, so she'll be more present than China and Russia combined, won't she? I think everyone needs to back off a bit when it comes to her health and leave her alone. She's always acted with dignity, so I can't wait. Leave our Queen alone.
Yeah, it's actually just occurred to me that just how young she was almost when she came to the throne, because that she was essentially younger than me.
You'd be Queen now if you were the Queen.
Yeah, I mean, I would love her. I would love it. But
just be very grateful, everyone.
yeah, but so she has obviously she's had an incredible, I was going to say career, that's not what it is, but she's had an incredible reign as a monarch. She's incredibly well respected, not just in this country and globally. And the fact she still gets up and just does her royal duties, I find absolutely staggering and incredible. And I do find, of course, that some of the conversations can become a bit distasteful and disrespectful when the Queen gets ill, and obviously people in our industry want to get all the scoops around that. But I don't think she will stop until...
No.
Because, she hasn't stopped at 95. I don't think she'll ever stop if she has anything to do with it. So I wish her all the best, I think. And I don't think anybody's necessarily trying to get her and I don't think there's anybody actively hating on the Queen for being ill. It's probably being a bit disrespectful.
It's like information leeches, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's like, I do understand, obviously, she's the Queen and therefore we have public interest. But at the same time, the idea that you'd kick off because the palace didn't inform you that immediately, just FYI, she's in hospital. It's like, leave her alone. Leave her alone. What have you done with your life, Anyway, we move on.
Yes, and you can always get in touch with your views. Let us know what you think about that and anything else we're talking about today. GBviews at GBnews.uk. Yeah,
we've got a few already, actually, to be fair. GBviews at GBnews.uk, as Mercy rightly said. Well said, Patrick, leave our Queen alone. And that's from, ironically, Philip, actually. Also, well said, Patrick. What with her being in hospital got to do with any of us? We have privacy, why can't she? And then this is what you love to see. Long live the Queen. Too right, Dee. Well said, well said. So those are some views.
Yes, and keep them coming in. And after the break, we'll be talking to a lesbian activist group about the story that some lesbians are claiming they faced accusations of transphobia and actual threats of violence for admitting they're not attracted to men who have transitioned into women. We'll be bringing you that after this. Now, some lesbians are claiming they have faced accusations of being transphobic and threats of violence for admitting they're not attracted to transgender women, which is biological men who have transitioned into women. And this comes amid rows between women and trans women about the importance of sex characteristics and concerns around self-identification.
Right, OK, so lesbians have spoken out and said that they have at times even felt pressured to have sex with trans women or coerced into accepting them as partners for fear of being labelled bigoted or transphobic for not wanting to have sex with essentially biological men, right? So more than half of the 80 women who responded to a survey by campaign group Get the L Out reported being pressured or coerced to accept a trans woman as a sexual partner.
Yes, well, Angela Wild is the co-founder of the lesbian feminist activist group Get the L Out that we just mentioned there, and she joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. This will feel like a bit of a minefield for some people, and even us explaining it to the average person, they might feel quite baffled. So can you sort of, in layman's terms, explain what's going on here?
Okay, in layman's term, lesbians are women who are sexually and, romantically attracted to other women. And we're talking about sex here, female to female. And what's going on is that we are receiving, a lot of us are receiving sexual pressure from men who have transitioned, who identify as women, who identify as lesbian. So to have sex with these men. Otherwise, we get called transphobic, TERFs, bigoted, Nazi, sometimes racist. This is pretty much what it is. It's called the cotton ceiling. I encourage everybody to have a little look on Twitter for screenshot of that. And it's happening a lot online. It's also happening in real life.
Yes, I find that quite shocking, to be honest, the idea that if I'm a woman and I'm a lesbian and a man transitions into a woman, then I almost don't have a right to say, actually, I don't want to, I know you tell me you're a woman, but you're biologically male, so that's not for me. I find it shocking that people are being labelled transphobic and threatened because of that. And it brings me to something else, which is I've heard that lesbians have been forced to have sex with men previously as a form of conversion therapy in places around the world. There's a bit of a parallel here. That's shocking, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it is very similar. In fact, it's the same rhetoric that we hear. As lesbian, when straight men want to engage in sexual activity with us, they would just say things like, you just haven't met the right man, you just haven't had the right sex with the right man. And this is exactly the same thing that we receive from men who identify as trans. How do you know you don't like it if you haven't tried it, and so on, and you're a bigot. Now, what I wanted to say is that this pressure comes in three different levels, and the mainstream organizations are in fact absolutely essential in promoting this idea. The first time that this cotton ceiling idea was mentioned was by Planned Parenthood in Toronto in 2012, and they ran a workshop aimed at trans women, so men who identify as trans, to help them overcome the barrier they may face when they want to engage in sexual activity with lesbians, who by definition do not want to have sex with males. So we're talking about really quite a systematic cultural pressure. Stonewall is involved in this, the UN, LGBT Youth Scotland. Recently all these organizations have been promoting the idea that male can be lesbians, and that if you engage in lesbian sex, you can get pregnant. This is just not possible, right?
Yeah.
No, it's not. Sorry, and look, forgive me, because I will hold my hands up to this. I do find this whole thing quite confusing at times, but I think it's because it is. And frankly, for me, just full disclosure, where I'm at, I don't understand where the feminism is in this. I don't understand how we've managed to get to a situation as a society where someone like me can tell someone like you what it means to be a woman and who you should be attracted to. And I just literally don't understand that. Do you feel as though now that your sexual preference is essentially being used as I don't know, discrimination in some way?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say this because women understand what is going on with lesbians, and a lot of men have your response where it's a bit confusing. If you're a straight man and you date a person that you think is attractive, suddenly you get in bed, that person has a penis. You might be a little bit confused. You might be a little bit challenged. You might not be happy. For lesbians, when this happens, it's a rape scenario. And this is what happens in real life. So absolutely, what happened yesterday with the release of this BBC piece, which was long overdue, and I'm very grateful that it's out, is that, well, organizations like Stonewall, but also prominent trans activists have been, again, reinforcing the idea that if we as a group exclude sexually other groups, then we are just as bad as racist. I mean, sexual orientation is about exclusivity. You would never say to a straight man, you're actually being bigoted because you don't want to sleep with other men. Why is this courtesy? Why is this right not given to lesbians? I do not know. What do you think?
Well, Angela, thank you so much for clarifying all of that for us and explaining the situation there. The piece you mentioned there, which has been printed in the BBC, giving these accounts of lesbians, I found it really interesting. As we say, it's not necessarily an area most people would of course be thinking about or know the ins and outs of, but we appreciate you coming on this morning. Angela Wild, their co-founder of the Get the L Out campaign. And I think the comparison there, if you were a straight man and you obviously, are dating or you go home with a woman and then it turns out that actually that woman
is a man.
Was a biological man, of course. You have every right.
I think I'd probably say something.
Yeah, exactly. You would have every right, you would think, to say, actually, no.
Yeah. No, but that's that's just consent, isn't it? That's normal consent. I don't understand how we've ended up in this situation where
because
some
then
people...
you'd be called transphobic. Because
yeah,
then...
but why?
because you'd say, well, you just because I'm a man who's transitioned into a woman and not a real woman, you're discriminating against me. That's what would happen, and it is absolutely absurd.
But it would be like, wouldn't it be like, say, oh, look, I want to go on holiday to America. Well, why aren't you going to Africa, you racist? So, well, I want to go on holiday to America.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's probably too simplistic, but I mean,
but let us know what you think. GB Views at GBNews.uk. They're obviously quite an interesting topic, but let's take you to something else now, which I found quite strange. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Oxford this week to welcome a giant puppet which represents refugee children. Little Amal, a 3.5-metre high puppet of a 9-year-old Syrian girl, landed in the UK last week. You can see pictures there. The puppet requires 3 people to operate, started its journey in Turkey in July and has travelled across Europe in order to raise awareness of these problems, the problems faced by young migrants. I just find it really strange looking and quite creepy, and I just think, how is this raising awareness of refugees? Like, can you explain?
Well, I mean, we're talking about it, I suppose, aren't we?
Yeah, it is.
Yes, it's well. Hey, look, obviously this is an issue that people feel very passionately about, one way or the other. But I suppose, art is art at the end of the day.
Well, the producer of the walk, Tracy Seward, said that she hopes this will help heal some of the trauma that refugees have suffered.
Naturally, the giant puppet you've made well, obviously. Yeah.
I'm not sure a 3-metre long giant puppet will heal refugees' trauma. And she wants to unite communities and bring attention to the valuable and most positive contribution. I genuinely find it extremely creepy.
OK, well, I mean, it does. I can understand that. I think, and I've always said this, ladies and gentlemen, there isn't a problem in the world that can't be solved by puppetry. And here we are. We're witnessing it now, aren't we? We're witnessing it. Yes. There you go. It must have been quite a large dinghy, one would have thought. But anyway, moving on. Insulate Britain are back at it again. Yes, this time on the A40, apparently, in West London. And who else but Mark White joins us now to tell us exactly what's going on. More glue?
Yes, unfortunately for the motorist, I'm back, the Grim Reaper, to bring this news of more in the way of chaos being caused by Insulate Britain. Of course, they have really manipulated the media once again into covering this story. Everybody is covering it. Another news channel have their helicopter up, expecting protests around the M25, is what we were told. Well, they've not struck the M25, have they? They've struck the A40 in West London and a roundabout in Dartford. That doesn't mean they won't go to the M25 later, but they are manipulators. They manipulate us into covering it. It's a difficult one for us because there is news value in the disruption that they're causing. If we don't do it, we get accused of censorship in not covering it. But then there's the other issue is I'm quite conflicted about giving them the oxygen of publicity again, because this is their goal. And they've achieved that by getting as to the headlines. If you remember Insulate Britain, we'd never heard of them.
No.
A
It's a
month or
happier
two
time,
ago.
wasn't it?
Everybody was confusing them for Extinction Rebellion. They are an offshoot. But of course now everybody's heard of them. They are talked about. They've made a calculation that, you know, despite the fact they are upsetting many people, and we say that that's turning everybody off the cause of environmentalism, from their goal, they've achieved what they want to do, which is to get this on the agenda, get everybody talking about it, knowing their name. So from that point, it's a win-win for them.
Yeah. Can I just bring your attention actually to a tweet I saw from 2 days ago from Grant Shapps, Transport Secretary, who said, "Today I instructed National Highways to apply for an injunction covering the entire strategic road network. Tonight this has been granted on a temporary basis by the High Court." So I'm quite confused about why they're still sort of being allowed to do this if these injunctions are in place.
You're not the only one, and it's quite complex, to be honest. The injunctions that the government are going for, they sound great and grand in terms of big announcements that we, again, follow suit and, publicise this, and it looks like the government is taking decisive action. Well, I suppose they are, but it's some way down the road because it's a civil matter. So they are breaking the law currently by blocking the Queen's Highway. That is a criminal offence under the Road Traffic Act. The sanctions against them are all relatively minor at the end of the day, fines and that kind of thing. And of course, they are not held in custody for any length of time. They're processed and released, and they're going back out and doing the same protest over and over again. The injunction was seen as a potential solution because breaking the injunction, you are in contempt of court potentially. Judges take that much more seriously. It has, at the very maximum level, although no one's ever going to be jailed for 2 years. But it's still, a more severe sanction. But because it's a civil process and they have to serve injunctions on people and set trial dates, etc., it's some way off. So it's going to be the end of November before we get that court case dealing with 124 of these activists who've been served with that injunction. In the meantime, they're out there just continuing to blockade roads, cause people absolute misery who caught up in that, and getting attention and getting us talking about it.
They are,
again.
but you're absolutely spot on. We can't ignore it, and it's just this annoying cycle that we're caught up in, isn't it? But at least we're not on the A40, I suppose. Mark, thank you very, very much there. Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Yes,
and let's now go to some of your views. We've been talking about a few things this morning. Patrick did his monologue on leaving the Queen alone. She's been unwell, will not be attending COP26 in person. We also spoke about some of the trans rows that are going on with lesbians being called transphobic when they refuse to be with men who have transitioned to women.
Yes, and lots of emails have come in about that issue. Not a lot of them I can read out on air, believe it or not. But anyway, let's stick to stuff about the Queen. The Queen has done more for the country than any other person, so let her enjoy some retirement. She's not actually saying she's retiring, but anyway, there are plenty of hangers-on, and we need to let them live a comfortable life. The pressure on the Queen may well end up killing her. That's from Barry. So strong views there, Barry. But I think that's what, just back off the Queen a bit. But she's not that ill, is she? She's 95, by the way. I mean, like I said before, I'll obviously be dead by then. I mean, I don't know how you feel like you'll be at 95 years old. I mean, the fact that she's turning up as well and doing a Zoom thing.
And she just looks like she still enjoys her roles, which she just radiates, doesn't she?
Yes.
But yeah, keep your views coming in, GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more on today's top stories and plenty of your views after a short break.
Hello, very good morning to you. Well, there's a lot of wet weather to come over the next few days. Through today, we've got some persistent rain across western parts of the UK, and it's windy and mild. And that's all down to this air coming up from the southwest. But we've got this weather front here, and that's becoming pretty persistent through the day today, not moving very quickly, very far. We've got weather warnings in place across northern England through today, but as we go into Thursday, we'll have one in for Wales as well. Let's take a look at where that rain is at the moment then. We've got some pretty heavy rain across southern Scotland and Cumbria. It's just clearing out of Northern Ireland. It's gradually trickling its way slowly southwards. A lot of cloud in the sky elsewhere. A few sunny breaks developing to the east of higher ground through Wednesday afternoon, but with strong winds, it will feel quite gusty around the coastal areas, despite, though, temperatures getting up to 18, that's 64 in Fahrenheit. As we go through Wednesday evening then, we'll continue to see that rain pushing its way slowly southwards, becoming heavier then across northwest Wales and eventually getting into more of Wales as we go into the early hours of Thursday. Again, ahead of it, we'll see a lot of cloud in the sky, another very mild picture over into the early hours of Thursday, but just starting to turn a little bit cooler in the far northwest of Scotland, 9 degrees there in Stornoway, 48 Fahrenheit, compared to 12 degrees there in London. Now, as we go through into Thursday, what have we got on the cards? More in the way of rain across these western areas. It really is going to persist, and I think those totals will start to build up. So expect some surface water flooding on the roads, the risk of some flash flooding as well in places. Do take care if you are planning any journeys. Still dry across southeast England through the day. Some sunshine developing here. A much, much brighter day for Northern Ireland. A few showers coming in across Scotland, and still on the mild side across the board. Now, as we go into the Halloween weekend, it stays fairly unsettled, further strong winds and the risk of some heavy rain at times too. Our temperatures begin to slide away, though, as we go into Sunday. I'll see you very soon. Take care.
Good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point right here on GB News. With me, Patrick Christys and Mercy Moroki. We're here with you all the way until 11:30, actually, when our special budget coverage will take over. But until then, we've got a show full of all today's big topics and the biggest guests and the issues that matter to you.
Yes, so make sure you get in touch with your views on GB Views at gbnews.uk. We'll read those out throughout the show. But first, let's give you the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 10 o'clock. Rising wages, more NHS funding and regional transport investment. Well, that and more will be revealed in the budget this afternoon. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, will announce a stronger UK economy of the future. The Office for Budget Responsibility is expected to increase its growth outlook for 2021 and cut unemployment predictions. Keir Starmer tweeted, "The budget must take the pressure off working people." Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, told GB News the government is spending more money than it brings in through tax.
Overall, what we can expect, Tom, is the Chancellor to spend a lot of money that, frankly, he doesn't have. We've seen £7 billion promised for local infrastructure projects. We've seen another £6 billion promised for the National Health Service. The public sector pay freeze looks like that's going to come to an end. Inflation's kicking in, so we might see public sector pay next year go up.
NHS Test and Trace has failed its main objective to enable people to return to normal life, and it risks wasting public money. Well, that's according to MPs. A report by the Public Accounts Committee criticises the programme's handling of what they call eye-watering sums of money. Test and Trace has cost £37 billion in the past 2 years. The committee say it hasn't worked. They report that only 14% of nearly 700 million lateral flow tests sent out actually had their results reported. The Queen has decided not to attend the COP26 climate change summit. The monarch is following medical advice to rest and carry out only light duties, according to a palace statement, though she remains in good spirits. Queen Elizabeth had been planning to travel to Scotland on Monday, but now she'll record a video speech later this week that will be played at the conference. A palace spokesman said Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters are going to be sent out this week, inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Vaccines have been available for this age group in schools in England since September. But since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs through the National Booking Service for their local sites. A prosecutor says criminal charges are possible in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer on the film set for Rust. Set electrician Sergei Svetnoy shared this pictures of Helena Hutchins on set, standing in front there of Alec Baldwin in a white beanie. Hutchins was killed when the Hollywood actor Alec Baldwin accidentally shot her while rehearsing. Investigators were told Baldwin believed the gun did not contain live ammunition. Santa Fe County District Attorney told the New York Times, "Everything at this point, including criminal charges, is on the table." The attorney and the county sheriff are holding a press conference later today. A man has been charged with the murder of 2 teenage boys in Essex. The 2 boys were killed in Regency Court in Brentwood in the early hours of Sunday morning. 19-year-old Frankie Watson will appear at Southend Magistrates Court today, charged with 2 counts of murder and the possession of an offensive weapon. Water companies will now have a legal duty to reduce the impact of sewage discharges from storm overflows. Last week, the government voted against an amendment that would hold water firms legally responsible for polluting them. But public anger and the House of Lords backed an amendment forced a government U-turn. Insulate Britain protesters blocked roads at the Dartford crossing and the A40 near Acton this morning. All 6 protesters at the Dartford crossing have now been arrested. Kent police say those roads are now clear. Eco-protester Mark Coleman is urging the Prime Minister to fix what he calls a housing insulation crisis.
It's simple, there's been plans to do this for years, but it's not happened. And people die, tens of thousands die each year from fuel poverty. So this must be done. Come on, Boris, get on with the job.
Farming and meat industry bosses have warned that labour shortfalls could result in a shortage of turkeys in the UK for Christmas. Bosses warned MPs that produce may have to be imported from Europe. Graham Deere, chairman of the British Poultry Council, said that around 90% of our shortages are in the processing plants, as non-UK workers leaving during the pandemic contributed to a shortfall in staff numbers.
We have been given access to the seasonal worker scheme for up to 5,500, but that finishes on the 31st of December. We would have loved to have known about that in June, in which case we could have placed enough turkeys to be able to deliver a full Christmas.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you at 10:30. But now back to the point with Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a full show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussion on the issues you care about. So here's what's on the menu for this hour.
Yes, indeed. Well, the National Health Service's £37 billion track and trace programme has failed to achieve its main objective, which was to help people live more of a normal life throughout the course of the pandemic, according to the Public Accounts Committee. We'll talk to Labour MP Dame Meg Hillier, the chair of that committee, in just a moment.
Yes, and of course, today is the day, the big day. The budget will be looking ahead to what we can expect from the Treasury. And yesterday, Patrick took to the streets of London to ask you, the great British public, what the Chancellor can do to make you feel better off. He'll be reporting back.
Yes, and we've heard a lot about how cow poo is bad for the environment, but could it also be the answer to the energy crisis? We'll be talking to a man who's overseen the development of new batteries made of actual cow poo. So yes, we'll have that.
Yes.
Well, that was news to me as much as anyone else. But yes, anyway, we'll obviously have all of that coming up and much more across the programme. You can get in touch with us, GB Views and gbnews.uk. But first, and a lot more seriously, Mercy gives her views on whole life orders, but specifically, really, about Wayne Couzens.
Wayne Couzens, the former Met officer who kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah Everard, has officially sought an appeal against the whole life term he was handed last month. Couzens used the guise of COVID powers to falsely arrest Miss Everard as she walked home from a friend's house in March. The details that were revealed in this recent sentencing hearing of how Couzens callously planned and carried out his attack are nothing short of harrowing. And let's be very clear, Wayne Couzens is the very worst of humanity. And he's also a man with absolutely no remorse for what he has done, it seems. He showed no remorse after his crimes, and he shows no remorse now. Hours after he had burned Sarah's body, he called an escort for sex. This was, by the way, on the same day he took his wife and 2 children out on a day to the same area he had tried to get rid of Sarah's body. This shows you how utterly depraved he is on every level. Cousins is also a man who has avoided taking full responsibility for his actions at every opportunity, and he's doing that again. Following his arrest, he tried to spin a web of lies around the police, making up a story about how he had handed Sarah over to an Eastern European gang who he was indebted to, how he had no idea what happened to her, and that his actions were to keep his own family safe. But sentencing him to a whole life term at the Old Bailey, Lord Justice Fulford likened his crime to that of a terrorist, saying it was, quote, of equal seriousness as a murder carried out for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial or ideological cause. A whole life order for Cousins was not just a victory for Sarah's family, it was a victory for justice itself. He joins around 60 prisoners in the country who will die in jail, for whom life really does mean life. He joins the likes of notorious serial killer Levi Belfield, who murdered 13-year-old Millie Dowler, as well as 2 other young women. Michael Adebolaja, responsible for the daylight slaying of British soldier Lee Rigby in the name of Islam in 2013. And Mark Bridger, who kidnapped 5-year-old April Jones before sexually abusing her, murdering her and disposing of her body in 2012. The irony is, by appealing his whole life order, Cousins prove exactly why he deserves one. Exactly why it is right that judges have whole life orders at their disposal. His appeal of his sentence suggests one thing to me, that he does not think he deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did. It suggests that he has very little remorse, no understanding of how serious his crime is, and virtually no desire for full accountability. In other words, criminals like Wayne Cousins are exactly why some people deserve to die in jail. And I, along with every sane person in Britain, I hope he does.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, I think that I find it quite hard to... well, I can't say what I really think about Wayne Cousins.
Yeah, I think it's just... insult to injury is probably a massive understatement, but that's what it is. This idea that he's admitted he did this, and, you know, which is sadly better than him saying he didn't, because then the family would have had to go through the whole trial. He was sentenced for what he did. I mean, the details that came out were absolutely shocking and disgusting. I think, you know, they floored everybody who heard them. And he's obviously been handed this life sentence, which, as I say, is not given to many criminals. Only around 60, 1%, I think, something like that, of the country's people serving life sentence in this country have a whole life order. That's how sparingly they're used. They're used for the very worst of crimes. Yeah. And then for him to now try and appeal that, obviously is an indication he thinks that an injustice has been done to him, that he doesn't deserve to go to prison for life. And it just really, for me, that this is a big measure of the man, as if everything else wasn't. The fact that he still, even to this day, doesn't want to take full responsibility for it.
He doesn't at all, and it's all very well and good him kind of admitting to what he did, but actually in doing so, it did, yes, save the family, of course, the idea that they had to relive absolutely every single horrific element of what happened, but it also protected him from having to tell them every single horrific element. And I'm just going to read you a little bit, just very quickly, from some of the victim impact statements in this. Now, Katie Everard, who's Sarah's sister, said, you disposed of my sister's body like it was rubbish. You fly-tipped her like she meant nothing. She meant everything. We couldn't even see her. Her brain was removed from her skull to check for trauma and cause of death. I still don't know if they put that back in. She goes on to list various things and basically say to him, we don't know exactly what happened, and we never will. And Wayne Cousins will take that to his grave, potentially, and hopefully ends up in that grave relatively soon. But anyway, but this is the issue. The idea now that he can claim any kind of apology whatsoever, or claim any kind of remorse, I should say, whatsoever for this, and at the same time still think that he at some point deserves to go back on the streets of Britain is absolutely nuts.
Yes, indeed. So very depressing situation. And of course, when we do know what the results of his claim for that appeal is, we will bring you that. That won't be for a while, though, of course. Yes. But moving on now to our top story. A report claims NHS Test and Trace failed on its main objective to help limit COVID transmission, despite being given, quote, unimaginable resources. The damning report comes from the Public Accounts Committee, which says outcomes were muddled, with many of the system's aims being overstated or not achieved. Since the start of the pandemic, Test and Trace has received £37 billion, and the report claims its failures could cost taxpayers a further hundreds of millions of pounds.
Wow. Well, anyway, Dame Meg Hillier, Labour MP and chair of the Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, is with us now. Thank you very much for taking the time for us today. Yet another drastic overspend and under-deliver by this government. You can add it to the list alongside the Nightingale hospitals, presumably.
Well, yes. No, look, we talk about mentioning the Nightingale hospitals. We knew at the beginning there would be money spent on things that might not be wasted. We've got lots of ventilators that we didn't use, and we understood that when we were looking about how we'd count the money. But Test and Trace has repeatedly spent and not learnt from its mistakes, and it set out really bold aims. It itself set these aims out of preventing future lockdowns, and yet 2 more followed. And it was just never really acknowledging that its aims were not being achieved and never learning from the mistakes that it was making. And that 37 billion, if you look at the normal NHS budget in a normal year, that's 150 billion. And this was 37 billion for one project over 2 years. It was a lot of money, so we needed to see better results than we have done.
All the sort of stats in, this report are shocking to me. I mean, you mentioned that £37 billion. Apparently, that's equivalent to 20% of the entire budget for the NHS. Contractors being paid an average of £1,100 a day. Only 14% of the 690 million lateral flow tests sent out actually had results reported. All of this seems shocking to me. I mean, where's the accountability? What are the government, or what do you want the government to do now to take accountability?
Well, look, Test and Trace as an organisation has now been folded into the UK Health Security Agency, so they've got a job to do. But going back to what they did at the beginning, yes, we needed a lot of testing, so logistically they got that moving. But the only benefit of testing is if you're also tracing the contacts, and that failed repeatedly. And they, as you say, a lot of those lateral flows are sitting either dusty in someone's living room, unused, or they were used and never logged. But Mercy, if you look at the booklet that came with it, if anyone's got them at home, dig it out. It's page 15 of a 20-page booklet which tells you that you've got to register the test. So I can see that a lot of people might have got confused. So there's that interaction with ordinary people's lives didn't really form enough of part of what they were doing. They didn't really get that, and they haven't got the data to prove what they achieved.
OK. All right, just look, hey, I've got to put this to you. You know, is this Captain Hindsight striking again? You know, OK, this wasn't great. It was an unequivocal waste of cash, and there are a catalogue of other things, let's be honest, this government has wasted money on. But not being funny, I wasn't hearing any solutions coming from your side of the chamber.
Well, no, actually, I chair a cross-party committee. This is a cross-party report. Let's be absolutely clear. We look at the money, we look at the data, we look at the outcomes, and we have, as a cross-party committee, produced this report. But putting my Labour MP hat on, Keir Starmer did call out the Prime Minister in May of last year about stopping normal testing, and Test and Trace wasn't then up and running. And the Prime Minister made these big, bold, gung-ho promises about it being a world-beating service. Remember the moonshot he talked about? Money was no object. And that's, if you're going to deliver, you could argue that was all right. But in the end, they didn't deliver what they set out to. So these promises were way overreach for what was then eventually delivered. So that's what my committee's found out. And of course we have to look backwards a bit because we need to see if we can get the data and the numbers in order to do that. But we are going to be watching this along with our sister select committees on behalf of the taxpayer as it's now rolled into this new agency.
And I have to ask you, because of course this is happening in about an hour or so, the Chancellor will of course be delivering his budget, and the committee you chair, its remit is to examine the value for money for government projects, programmes and service delivery. What other areas do you think the government has not been providing value for money, and what would you like to hear from the Chancellor today about how we could have better value for money as the taxpayer, given that the taxpayer is going to foot much of the bill for what the Chancellor will want to do?
Well, right. Well, he's already trailed. He's increasing wages or reducing wage freezes, pulling off wage freezes in the public sector. But we need to know how that's ever going to be funded, because if he's not going to give more money to departments, so we'll be looking at that with every individual department. And crucially, he's promised to put money into infrastructure. We're waiting and we're thinking we might get some announcements on that and on levelling up. But these are very vague terms, Mercy. They're not really explained. And we, as a committee, will want to be challenging the government about what it's setting out to do and measuring it against its own promises. So we need detail, and then we'll hold them to account on the promises on that detail.
Well, Dame Hillier, thank you so much for joining us this morning on that important issue. I think there'll be a lot of people watching who will not be happy at all that the government seems to have wasted, yet again, so much money on that test and trace scheme. And I was particularly struck as well that uptake of its service was described by this report as well as variable, with only a minority of people experiencing COVID symptoms actually getting a test, and actually vulnerable people were much less likely to take a COVID test than others. So it was almost doing the opposite of what it was intended to do. Because it wasn't even reaching vulnerable people properly to get them those tests
no, not
that
at
they
all.
needed.
And then also it was kind of going both ways, wasn't it? There was a time when we had, remember the ping-demic, you know, when people, you could be within like a half-mile radius of someone who might have sneezed in the last week, and all of a sudden you were getting pinged, but then apparently the vulnerable weren't. I think it is important to say, look, this is obviously a massive waste of our cash, right? However, at the same time, it's not as if loads of other countries got this right. This was a relatively new technology, so there are excuses there, although, again, can we have a refund,
I think it's in the context of all the other wastage.
Yeah. You've got your Nightingale hospitals. We've got the lot, ladies and gents. But there we go. But David's been in touch in our inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk, in terms of our right to get a refund. Basically asking for a refund. And there's quite a lot of that going about, ladies and gentlemen. Yes.
Yes, and keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But after the break, Patrick took to the streets of London yesterday to get the dish on Rish ahead of today's budget announcement. But first, the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. Well, there's a lot of wet weather to come over the next few days. Through today, we've got some persistent rain across western parts of the UK, and it's windy and mild. And that's all down to this air coming up from the southwest. But we've got this weather front here, and that's becoming pretty persistent through the day today, not moving very quickly, very far. We've got weather warnings in place across northern England through today, but as we go into Thursday, we'll have one in for Wales as well. Let's take a look at where that rain is at the moment then. We've got some pretty heavy rain across southern Scotland and Cumbria. It's just clearing out of Northern Ireland. It's gradually trickling its way slowly southwards. A lot of cloud in the sky elsewhere. A few sunny breaks developing to the east of higher ground through Wednesday afternoon, but with strong winds, it will feel quite gusty around the coastal areas, despite, though, temperatures getting up to 18, that's 64 in Fahrenheit. As we go through Wednesday evening then, we'll continue to see that rain pushing its way slowly southwards, becoming heavier then across northwest Wales and eventually getting into more of Wales as we go into the early hours of Thursday. Again, ahead of it, we'll see a lot of cloud in the sky, another very mild picture over into the early hours of Thursday, but just starting to turn a little bit cooler in the far northwest of Scotland, 9 degrees there in Stornoway, 48 Fahrenheit, compared to 12 degrees there in London. Now, as we go through into Thursday, what have we got on the cards? More in the way of rain across these western areas. It really is going to persist, and I think those totals will start to build up. So expect some surface water flooding on the roads, the risk of some flash flooding as well in places. Do take care if you are planning any journey. Still dry across southeast England through the day. Some sunshine developing here. A much, much brighter day for Northern Ireland. A few showers coming in across Scotland, and still on the mild side across the board. Now, as we go into the Halloween weekend, it stays fairly unsettled, further strong winds and the risk of some heavy rain at times too. Our temperatures begin to slide away, though, as we go into Sunday. I'll see you very soon. Take care.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Right now, today's a very, very big day, isn't it? It's budget day. Rishi Sunak is going to unveil exactly how we're going to spend our way out of this particular crisis. But I thought, hang on a minute, it's all very well and good, you know, talking about raising the minimum wage and money for our NHS and some stuff about the environment. What do you actually care about? What do you want? What would make you actually feel better off? And what do you maybe don't want him to do? So I went out pounding the pavements to see exactly what you thought. So here you go. Here's what you had to say.
What do I care about?
Yeah,
I care
money-wise.
about my children's education.
Yeah.
I care about the NHS.
Yeah.
And I care about self-employed.
It's got to be education, 100%.
Go on, why?
Because I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And we're struggling and drowning with no money.
OK, so what do you want? Where should it be spent then? Where exactly do you think? What's your issues?
We need to spend it on creative skills
Oh.
and skills for the real world.
They need to spend more money on focusing on their education and supporting them in what they've lost during lockdown.
Well, education, the NHS matters a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. Mental health, the effect that it's had on them is something that none of us can understand. None of us have ever been through it.
Yeah.
You could tell through COVID time that we needed the NHS badly, so NHS is probably a priority.
Well, better pay for the middle class, really.
OK, go on. So not a minimum wage increase, just...
that sort of thing.
That
Minimum
kind
wage
of thing?
Increase, living wage, that sort of thing, because everything's going up and nothing's coming down.
More things for, well, I don't know, what? Things like care in the community?
Health, everything, care, you know, and looking after each other and looking after them.
Basically the NHS for me.
OK.
After having cancer myself,
OK.
I would like to see them, you know, really come to their fore and give the money to the NHS. You know.
More money for the NHS?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely, yeah. That's the best way forward.
And why? Just because they've been hammered, I suppose?
Yes, yeah, and everything what we've been through the pandemic and what the healthcare workers have done for us, it's absolutely fantastic.
Patients need to get back into seeing their GPs, definitely, because phone just doesn't do the same kind of thing. You don't get that person-to-person interaction, so the GPs miss things over the telephone.
Absolutely.
And so we're just not getting the care that we need.
So maybe give them a bit of money, but give them a bit of an ultimatum as well. Get back to the office.
Yes, get back to the office, please.
Public services, better education.
Transport links.
Yeah?
Well, I'd like him to stop the charges for coming to London.
Yeah, so ULEZ stuff. Yeah,
it's a big problem for me.
Massive
We've got lots of vehicles, works vehicles, things are tight. Coming back into London is just something else you've got to pay.
I think sometimes they use the green agenda to just to raise revenue.
I don't want taxes going up too much more.
Good man.
At the moment, I don't want them going up too much more. I think we're going to struggle with the fact that things like the living wage and everything being pushed up at the moment.
Yeah.
I run a small business. To have to pay someone £9.50 an hour when they're only worth £60 a day, it's not going to make things easy.
Do you think they just don't fundamentally understand normal people?
They don't, no.
Do you trust the Tories with the budget?
Well, whoever's up there, they are going to tell you what you want to hear. So it doesn't matter who's up there.
I would trust the Tories with the budget.
How good are the British public? We've got a nation of fantastic Chancellors of the Exchequer, haven't we? Rishi, if you're watching, here's what people want. They're all right with more money for the NHS, but you need to tell GPs to get back to work as well. The carrot and the stick, and I think that has to be a fair trade. Not a huge amount of love for rising the green agenda tax, of course there isn't, but we've also got a lot of stuff about education and children's mental health. You know what? That's a budget I can probably get behind. Well, there we go. The great British public. And one thing that really stood out to me there is the fact that actually a lot of people that I spoke to were saying, well, it's all very well and good giving money to the NHS. You will have heard that there, everyone. NHS. Yeah, fine. What pretty much every single person said was, if we do give this amount of money to the NHS, a rumoured, roughly speaking, about $6 billion, then actually it almost should be mandated that GPs have to go and get back into their surgeries and do face-to-face appointments. I think people do want to see the receipts for their cash, don't they?
Yeah, so that £6 billion package of funding to help tackle NHS backlogs and invest in technology and data in a bid to improve, apparently, the efficiency and security. That's going to be in the budget. What else do we know is in there? An increase in the national living wage from £8.91 to £9.50. I think it's interesting what that gentleman said, because it's whenever we hear, an increase in the living wage, most people might think, well, that's great, because what's not to love about the lowest paid people in our society, well, the ones who are paid the legal living wage. There are some who actually aren't. But what's not to love about that going up? But actually, as that gentleman said it, It's all well and good, but him as a small business owner and many small business owners, that's something that now has to be factored into their costs. And so it does also, it can have negative impacts as well on business, basically. So
absolutely. I mean, he said one thing to me that I thought was really quite telling. He said, look, you know, now potentially I'll have to pay someone 80 quid a day who's worth 60 quid a day. And I know it sounds a bit of a callous thing to say. I can say, oh, someone's only worth this, but actually the fact is that sometimes that's the value for what someone's job is, right? So there we go. I believe, actually, sorry, I'm being shouted at in my ear, as always. Now, the Home Secretary apparently is appearing before the House of Commons Home Affairs Select Committee this morning to be quizzed by MPs, and we're going to go to it now, actually. I believe. Let's take it live
welfare
now.
support has been put in place. Financial support has been put in place, and if I may, this isn't all Home Office as well, this is across government. So we have been the sort of coordinators doing the dot matrix of joining things up. But with that, also education support for children, and with DWP in particular, looking at jobs and skills, how we can start to really match people up with their skills to employment. So I can even speak just on Afghanistan around the distribution of the 15,000 people nationwide. We have a majority of them in London, and obviously with that there is a lot of cross-government work, which is why it's called Operation Warm Welcome, in terms of other government departments coming together to provide the support that is needed. But it's long-term. None of this, you know, changes overnight people's circumstances. And then, Baroness Hamley, with that, we are then in the process with the new Levelling Up Department, which was the former Ministry for Local Government and Housing, in terms of working with local authorities who've been given financial support to effectively match people up, families up, to then give them permanent accommodation. That is challenging for a number of reasons. Accommodation, homes are in short supply, but also the right type of homes, particularly with large families too.
Right, thank you. I mean, there's so much that's needed, as we all recognise. I understand that Germany supplies 600 hours for each refugee on language and orientation. France is 200. There are all sorts of obstacles that, you know, personal, individual ones, that in where the lessons or classes, whatever, are provided, it's much harder for women to get to them because men assume the women will stay home with the children. The men can access the integration programs. How are we going to make sure that the programs are available to everyone? For instance, very specifically, childcare being made available. So
well, I think that's right.
Real access.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I don't think any of us in this room would dispute the fact that access should be for everybody, men and women. That is clearly our objective, but I'll be very, very candid right now. While we have people accommodated in hotels, the logistics and the infrastructure for providing support is challenging. Okay. I'm very, very honest about this. Until we can settle people,
well ahead.
So absolutely. So until we can settle people into, you know, what will be their new communities where they can rebuild their lives or restart their lives. I mean, I look at this from the lens of restarting their lives, which means, first of all, for children, making sure children are in school. So a good example of this, I mean, there are plenty of discussions taking place, and if you forgive me, I'm not leading all these discussions. We have a minister for the resettlement scheme who is leading this work. But education is a very, very good example. So the Department for Education right now are very clear that they have identified where there are places in schools where they want the children who have been obviously with these evacuated families who are in the United Kingdom, in the UK, in England and Wales in particular, to go into school. From that basis, that then gives stability, and then of course we can start working with the parents in terms of access to language, access to skills training, and then of course that leads to the next foundation, which is access to employment. So there are, I mean, I'm sure my colleagues, I'd be very happy in future to come back and explain how this comes together. But these are early days, and in all honesty, we are not at the stage where we can say component A, B, C are leading to the following outcomes just yet. It does not mean that work is not taking place. There is extensive work taking place across the whole panoply of government.
Well, I think we can all agree was one of the dullest grillings that the world has ever seen. But anyway, thank you very much. Pretty. Right, I'm just going to go into my inbox now, gbviews@gbnews.uk, to let you lot spice it up a little bit. It's no good pouring money into the NHS. They waste billions. The way it's managed needs to be looked at first. And that's from Charles. And that's in relation, of course, to the Vox Pop idea, but I pounded the streets and asked you what you really want from our budget. Lots of you, of course, said the NHS, but you know, we can't just keep pouring money into it, and that did seem to come across from you guys.
Yeah, the NHS one is interesting because it is one of, if not the biggest issues, especially when it comes to election time. And on one hand, you know, when you ask people what do you want the government to focus on, to spend on, they will say the NHS. But we were speaking just yesterday about how much we spend as a country on our NHS budget. We know, of course, the Chancellor is raising. Not income tax. I forget the name of the tax. And he's also boosting in this budget. He's going to announce a £6 million boost to the NHS as well. That's on top of national insurance is the one I was looking for. So the NHS has, I feel, enough money, a lot of money from us. So
yes,
not sure I want to necessarily pay more tax for the NHS.
Well, Dave's been in touch. Tell the Chancellor we need to get back to what made this country great. Manufacturing, make British-made goods VAT-free, he says. Small businesses, I bet the boss isn't on minimum wage, but don't mind his workers struggling. That's obviously in relation to the gentleman that I spoke to there who said that, actually, look, OK, come on, we do need to... we should stop raising the minimum wage because he'd have to pay staff more, basically. There was that, wasn't there? But anyway, after the break, yes, cow poo is being hailed as the latest source of organic energy. Is this a stroke of genius or something else? We will take a look after today's latest headlines.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Rising wages, more NHS funding and regional transport investment. That and more will be revealed in the budget this afternoon. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, will announce a stronger UK economy of the future. Keir Starmer, though, leader of the opposition, said the budget must take the pressure off working people. NHS Test and Trace has failed its main objective to enable people to return to normal and risks wasting public money. That's according to MPs. A report by the Public Accounts Committee say despite investing £37 billion on Test and Trace, it hasn't worked. They report that only 14% of lateral flow tests sent out actually had their results reported. The Queen has decided not to attend the COP26 climate change summit. The monarch is following medical advice to rest and carry out only light duties. And according to a palace statement, though, she remains in good spirits. Queen Elizabeth will now record a video speech later this week that will be played at the conference. A palace spokesman said Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters will be sent out this week, inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs for this age group through the National Booking Service at local sites. A man has been charged with the murder of 2 teenage boys in Essex. The 2 boys were killed in Regency Court in Brentwood in the early hours of Sunday morning. 19-year-old Frankie Watson will appear at Southend Magistrates Court today, charged with 2 counts of murder and the possession of an offensive weapon. I'll have more on today's top stories for you at 11 o'clock.
Morning, everyone. Now, if you've shopped online over the last few years, apparently chances are that you've seen adverts on buy now, pay later schemes. And there are companies that offer to delay payment for goods you've purchased. Well, for the first time, the sum of outstanding payments has topped more than £4 billion, which has spurred Consumer Group, to issue a stark warning to customers and businesses alike.
Yes, buy now, pay later schemes are criticised by some for creating an over-reliance on credit and are typically used by those who are under 30 or who have tighter finances with few credit checks and balances typically expected for loans. Well, Sue Anderson is head of media at Step Change, which is a debt charity, and she joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You've obviously been, your charity helps people deal with their debt problems. I'm assuming people's debt problems have increased as a result of the pandemic. If I can just disturb you for 1 second, we're just going to go to number 11 for a second. We're cutting to it now.
OK, well, there's Rishi Sunak. What's in his big red box? We'll have to wait and see. Normally, they like to pull a rabbit out of it, don't they? But I imagine, given the state of this country's finances at the moment, that rabbit will be skint and dead. But we'll have to wait and see what Rishi's got in store for us.
Yes, we're expecting the Chancellor to deliver his budget from the dispatch box in about 45 minutes, perhaps. So we'll bring you that live from the House of Commons.
Yes.
When he is delivering that budget. We're expecting loads
He's
to
already
come out.
previewed some stuff, hasn't he?
He has already done that. He has already announced that he will be giving public sector workers pay rises. Millions of nurses, teachers and members of the armed forces will receive a pay rise next April because he's lifting that pay freeze. Minimum wage is also expected to rise from £8.91 to £9.50. That's actually already been announced that he will be doing that. Other things include a £6 billion boost to the NHS. This is a £6 billion package to help the NHS tackle some of the backlogs. And education is getting some money too. A £3 billion investment will be given to post-16 education to boost technical training. And there's also going to be a 2 point... I know, that's quite impressive.
It's impressive. But how long does it have to go on for? You know, anyway, carry on.
£2.6 billion package as well. New school places for children with special educational needs and disabilities. So we'll be bringing you that in about 45 minutes when he is actually delivering his budget.
Yes, but we're now very, very sorry, Sue. Apologies for that, but you've been usurped by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I'm afraid. And, hey, look, there's rules to this game, I'm afraid. But, look, you are obviously head of media at Step Change, the debt charity, and this is in relation to the amount of buy now, pay later issues, and it's topped £4 billion, I believe. This isn't free money, is it?
No, it's not free money. And I think it's just worth saying, a bit like anything else, there are two sides to the coin. So on the one hand, buy now, pay later is liked by a lot of people because it's frictionless, it's easy, it's convenient, all those good things. But the other side of the coin is that because it's so easy, it can actually cause you to buy more stuff than you otherwise would have done, which might mean it's unaffordable for you. And we're increasingly seeing that people are turning to using buy now, pay later for real basic essentials. So things like if you can't afford to buy your kids' school uniform up front and buy now, pay later is offered as an option to you, in the short term that feels like a solution, but actually it may well just be storing up bigger problems for you for the future. So it's really important that this market is regulated like any other credit.
And talk to us about the extent of that regulation, because I believe it's in the process of that whole sector, buy now, pay later, is in the process of being brought under the Financial Conduct Authority, which sorts of regulates all other sort of banks and providers of finance. Has it already been brought under the Financial Conduct Authority's regulation?
No, it hasn't. So we've been lobbying for a form of regulation to begin in this market since way back, a couple of years at least ago. And we're only just seeing the consultation about how to do that. So although the government's accepted the fact that it should be regulated, it hasn't yet done that. So the consultation came out last week. That will run for some months for everyone to have their say about whether they agree or disagree about the form that regulation should take. And then the FCA will determine what they think and will actually put out a plan. Now, in the meantime, we've got Christmas coming. People will still be racking up a lot of buy now, pay later purchases over that period. So it's a really good idea for anyone thinking about using buy now, pay later, just to really stop and pause and think, would I be buying this if this form of credit were not being dangled at me? And if the answer is no, then just think about whether it's affordable.
And I was going to ask you before we were interrupted by the Chancellor, obviously your charity supports people who are in debt, who are in problem debt. What have you seen during the pandemic? Obviously, so many people have been financially impacted, and they might say, actually, I was able to get by because of schemes like this, because I didn't have to foot the bill immediately for the things I needed. And so some people might say we need things like this. People on low incomes need this kind of thing.
So what we saw was about 11 million people racking up some form of debt or difficulty paying for things during the pandemic. Now, some of that, as you rightly say, might well sort itself out as people get back into better paid employment, their income's restored in a way that perhaps it wasn't if they were unemployed or on furlough, whatever, during the pandemic. But it still leaves a big backlog of people with problems. And in our view, as a debt charity, seeing the number of people that we do every year who have entered a debt spiral, it's very unlikely that any form of credit is going to be the solution to people's debt problems. Because normally, people will do exactly what you say. They'll try and juggle, they'll try and cope. They'll think, maybe if I just use this form of credit, well, in a month or two's time, things might be better. But that's rarely true. It's more likely that the more you borrow, the more into the spiral you get. So for anyone who is facing that situation or is worried about that situation, it is far better to turn to an organisation like one of the reputable debt charities to try and sort that problem out rather than borrow more.
Well, look, absolutely. Sue, thank you so much. Sue Anderson, the head of media at Step Change, the debt charity. And of course, look, it is worth noting that if you are in financial trouble, I think it goes without saying that you're not alone, and it can be a bit of a spiral, can't it? So fingers crossed you can get yourselves out of it if that story particularly relates to you. Right, now, very much a shift in tone now, and, well, here we go. Could cow poo be a solution to the UK's renewable energy crisis? The farmers at Arla Group certainly think so. They say almost 1.2 million tonnes of cow slurry are available in the UK each year from their farms alone, and that the waste shouldn't go to waste.
Yes, they claim they can repurpose the poo into green energy that could potentially power up to 4% of the UK's households. They've even developed cow batteries, and we really do mean that. I think we can show you those. Cow batteries. These are batteries, rechargeable batteries, actually.
There you are. The world gets to now see that I bite my nails.
Rechargeable AA batteries there, which are powered by cow poo, believe it or not, and actually just look very impressive. A very cute design. So, yeah, a story we could particularly believe this morning. But joining us now from Copenhagen is Graham Wilkinson, the Group Agriculture Director at Arla, who is exactly the sort of person who can tell us all about this. So, I mean, first of all, obviously it does all sound like a bit of a joke, but it's actually quite a sophisticated technology, isn't it? Tell us how it all works.
Well, thank you for inviting me on it. It sounds a bit gimmicky, but it is actually a very serious opportunity that we're actually very excited about. If you take Britain, we've got an ambition to be 100% renewable energy by 2035, and we currently stand at 40% of energy coming from renewable sources. So we would like to call on government and industry to look at the breadth of the renewable energy mix that we look into to be able to power Britain's homes. We have within Arla we have just under 2,500 dairy farmers in the UK, 460,000 cows in total. That we believe through the form of anaerobic digestion that we could actually power up to 1.4 million UK homes.
Excuse me.
Well, no,
I'm so shocked that I'm coughing.
Absolutely.
What I was going to say is I was quite surprised actually to learn that a single Arla cow's yearly poo could power 3 households per year. That's staggering.
I was shocked.
It is, I suppose, how it actually works through anaerobic digestion. We ultimately take the cow poo or the cow slurry, we add it into an anaerobic digestion facility, which takes in animal waste. It breaks down into biogas, and actually, it's a double win here because that process not only produces green energy, but it also produces cleaner natural fertilisers that can actually reduce agriculture's emissions by up to 7%. So this really is a win-win.
About time cows paid their way, and I've always said that. You know, for too long, all they've offered me is steak and milk, and now they can light my home. You know, fantastic. Just to play devil's advocate, there's no way that this would end up being some kind of animal rights issue, is there? People feed cows more to get more slurry. I don't know. I can just see the Green lot being all over this.
Yeah, I think at the moment there is a lot of confusion around dairy. I think our dairy cow ultimately, I think, could potentially be one of the most sustainable animals on the planet, as you've mentioned there. But you know, there's a real good positive opportunity here, not in just fantastic nutritious dairy products, but also the energy that we could actually get from our humble cow here in the UK.
Fantastic stuff. Well, good. And look, if anyone is interested, it's the Arla Cow Battery, cow poo powered batteries. Thank you very much, Graham. Great to have you on board. Graham Wilkinson, the Group Agriculture Director at Arla.
Yeah.
Hey, turns out this could be the future.
You've got to love cows. They give us milk, cheese, steak.
What?
I'm saying you've got to love cows.
Cow cheese?
No, they give us cheese. Yeah. You know cheese comes from milk, right?
Yeah, I get that, but I prefer the goat variety.
And now they power our homes, apparently, or can power our homes in the future, which is great.
Yes, they also look quite cute. Anyway, someone else who looks quite cute, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is live for us this morning at Downing Street, and this is what we can expect from the budget later. Tom, what's going on?
What an introduction, Patrick. Yes, no, I'm outside number 11, where Rishi Sunak actually turned up a couple of minutes early, clearly trying to seem very much on top of everything. And he stood outside there with that traditional photo up, as we've come to expect from every budget, going back decades and decades now, with his Treasury team, raising that box aloft. And what is inside it, we don't have that much longer to wait to find out. In fact, for people who've been reading the papers over the last week and a half, we know pretty much the shape of the budget. There have been over a dozen press releases coming out of the Treasury trailing exactly what it will contain. The billions more for transport infrastructure, the millions more for veterans, the millions for family hubs, indeed a raise in the minimum wage and pay rises for public sector workers. It seems like there's very little left of this budget actually to announce, and so in that grand theatrical gesture that we've come to know so well, where the Chancellor raises his box aloft, and normally we're sort of sat there wondering what's inside that box. What on earth could he be about to say? Well, on this occasion, it seems like we pretty much know the gist of it. Will there be any rabbits? That's a big question, and I'm sure that the Chancellor will have wanted to keep one or two things up his sleeves. But of course, it's only around an hour and 40 minutes until the Chancellor stands up on his feet in the House of Commons. That's coming very soon, and of course, we'll bring you every second of it live here on GB News. A lot to look forward to, and crucially, a lot of post-match analysis. The devil will be in the detail, and we'll be combing through the detail of that budget after it's been delivered.
Yes, well, thank you, Tom. We look forward to that. We can bring you that about 11:30, so stay tuned for that. And keep all your thoughts coming in to us as well on our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But for now, we'll be back with more on today's top stories and plenty of your views after a short break.
Hello, very good morning to you. Well, there's a lot of wet weather to come over the next few days. Through today, we've got some persistent rain across western parts of the UK, and it's windy and mild. And that's all down to this air coming up from the southwest. But we've got this weather front here, and that's becoming pretty persistent through the day today, not moving very quickly, very far. We've got weather warnings in place across northern England through today, but as we go into Thursday, we'll have one in for Wales as well. Let's take a look at where that rain is at the moment then. We've got some pretty heavy rain across southern Scotland and Cumbria. It's just clearing out of Northern Ireland. It's gradually trickling its way slowly southwards. A lot of cloud in the sky elsewhere. A few sunny breaks developing to the east of higher ground through Wednesday afternoon, but with strong winds, it will feel quite gusty around the coastal areas, despite, though, temperatures getting up to 18, that's 64 in Fahrenheit. As we go through Wednesday evening then, we'll continue to see that rain pushing its way slowly southwards, becoming heavier then across northwest Wales and eventually getting into more of Wales as we go into the early hours of Thursday. Again, ahead of it, we'll see a lot of cloud in the sky, another very mild picture over into the early hours of Thursday, but just starting to turn a little bit cooler in the far northwest of Scotland, 9 degrees there in Stornoway, 48 Fahrenheit, compared to 12 degrees there in London. Now, as we go through into Thursday, what have we got on the cards? More in the way of rain across these western areas. It really is going to persist, and I think those totals will start to build up. So expect some surface water flooding on the roads, the risk of some flash flooding as well in places. Do take care if you are planning any journey. Still dry across southeast England through the day. Some sunshine developing here. A much brighter day for Northern Ireland. A few showers coming in across Scotland, and still on the mild side across the board. Now, as we go into the Halloween weekend, it stays fairly unsettled, further strong winds and the risk of some heavy rain at times too. Our temperatures begin to slide away, though, as we go into Sunday. I'll see you very soon. Take care.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel. They're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki, and we're here, apparently, for about the next half hour or so until Rishi Sunak decides to get a little bit of a wiggle on, and we will be bringing you a budget special.
Yes, indeed. So make sure you get in touch with your views at the usual email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll read those out throughout the rest of the show, but first it's time for the news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 11 o'clock. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is on his way to the Commons, where he'll deliver his autumn budget this afternoon. Rising wages, more NHS funding and regional transport investment are expected to feature. Rishi Sunak will announce a stronger UK economy of the future. The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, says the budget must take the pressure off working people. Well, one Labour MP told GB News she's worried it's going to be a very long, cold winter for people in her constituency.
I'm getting on the doorsteps a lot of concerns about increasing gas and electricity bills, people who go to work but have their income topped up by universal credit. The increase in the minimum wage to £9.50 is very welcome, but if that's combined with a £20 a week cut in your universal credit, you still come out worse off.
NHS Test and Trace has failed its main objective to enable people to return to normal life and risks wasting public money. That's according to MPs. Well, in a report by the Public Accounts Committee, they criticised the programme's handling of what they call eye-watering sums of money. Test and Trace has cost £37 billion in the past 2 years. The committee say it hasn't worked. They report that only 14% of our lateral flow tests sent out actually reported the results.
The only benefit of testing is if you're also tracing the contacts, and that failed repeatedly. And they, as you say, a lot of those lateral flows are sitting either dusty in someone's living room, unused, or they were used and never logged. It's page 15 of a 20-page booklet which tells you that you've got to register the test. So I can see that a lot of people might have got confused. So there's that interaction with ordinary people's lives didn't really form enough a part of what they were doing. They didn't really get that, and they haven't got the data to prove what they achieved.
The Queen has decided not to attend the COP26 climate change summit. The monarch is following medical advice to rest and carry out only light duties, and according to the palace statement, remains though in good spirits. Queen Elizabeth had been planning to travel to Scotland on Monday, but now will record a video speech later this week that will be played at the conference. A palace spokesman said Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters will be sent out this week, inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Vaccines have been available for this age group in schools in England since September, but since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs through the National Booking Service for local sites. A prosecutor says criminal charges are possible in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer on the film set of Rust. Set electrician Sergei Svetnoy shared this picture of Helena Hutchins on set, standing in front of Alec Baldwin there in a white beanie. Hutchins was killed when the Hollywood actor Alec Baldwin accidentally shot her while rehearsing. Investigators were told Baldwin believed the gun did not contain live ammunition. Santa Fe County District Attorney told the New York Times everything at this point, including criminal charges, is on the table. The attorney and the county sheriff are holding a press conference later today. Water companies will now have a legal duty to reduce the impact of sewage discharges from storm overflows. Last week, the government voted against an amendment that would hold water firms legally responsible for polluting waterways. Public anger and the House of Lords backing the amendment forced a government U-turn. 32 people have now been arrested after Insulate Britain protesters blocked roads on the M25. Kent police say motorists will still encounter some disruption. The final few protesters on the A40 near North Acton have also been arrested. Eco-protester Mark Coleman is urging the Prime Minister to fix what he calls a housing insulation crisis.
It's simple, there's been plans to do this for years, but it's not happened. And people die, tens of thousands die each year from fuel poverty. So this must be done. Come on, Boris, get on with the job.
Farming and meat industry bosses have warned that labour shortfalls could result in a shortage of turkeys in the UK for Christmas. Bosses warned MPs that produce may have to be imported from Europe. Graham Deere, chairman of the British Poultry Council, said around 90% of our shortages are in the processing plants, as non-UK workers leaving during the pandemic contributed to a shortfall in staff numbers. You're up to date here. I'll be back at 11:30. For now, let's return to The Point with Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning again. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all the big stories and lots of discussion on the issues you care about. We're expecting the Chancellor in about half an hour, so we'll bring you half an hour of top stories.
Yes, well, after days of leaks, it really is budget day. Woohoo! We're just half an hour away from Chancellor Rishi Sunak unveiling his autumn budget, apparently, as he promises that it begins the work of preparing a new economy post-COVID. We'll bring you the Chancellor live from the dispatch box as it happens.
Yes, and Amazon and the UK's 3 spy agencies have made a deal for the tech giant to host classified material in order to boost the use of data analytics and artificial intelligence for espionage. We'll be talking about what this means for security very shortly. We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Yes, right. Well, Chancellor Rishi Sunak will address MPs in Parliament later today to unveil his autumn budget. With COP26 just around the corner, all eyes will be on the government's plans to go green and what the implications might be for the taxpayer. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson even admits progress at the conference in Glasgow is touch and go, and backbench MP Philip Davies has criticised his own party's plans of going net zero by 2050. It was really important, actually, I thought this, and he's put a letter out that was in the local press, and I think he makes some salient points. He basically says that he labelled the plans as utterly futile, virtue-signalling gesture politics, saying the move would bankrupt the country along with many families.
Yes, well, our political editor Darren McCaffrey is live for us in Westminster this morning. Good morning, Darren. Notwithstanding the fact that so much of what the Chancellor is expected to announce has already been revealed, what are we expecting when we hear from him in about half an hour?
Yeah, indeed, and there's been an awful lot of criticism from not least of all the Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle about the leaks in the press, the deliberate leaks, it should be said, in the press in the last couple of days. Just to talk you through some of the announcements, as you say, we've already heard £6.9 billion for English city regions when it comes to public transport, £5.9 billion for the National Health Service when it comes to try and get rid of that backlog created because of the pandemic. A rise, of course, in the national living wage up to £9.50 an hour, £2.6 billion for schools, £1.6 billion also to help with T levels. It goes on and on and on. So you're right, when Rishi Sunak stands up at 12:30 just after Prime Minister's question time, you could well ask, what else has he got to announce? I think there are two things pretty outstanding. One is, how is this all going to be paid for? Yes, we know there are changes to the tax system, that national insurance hike, and the differences when it comes to the thresholds for income tax coming into place. But this is a Chancellor who wants to portray himself as a spender to a degree, but someone who is also, he says, determined to balance the books. Now, in that regard, Mercy, he does seem to have a little bit more headroom. The economy is growing slightly faster than the Treasury had thought even a matter of months ago. And then there is this second, much bigger question politically, I think, for the government around the cost of living. We know that inflation is going up, particularly energy prices. We know also that universal credit, that uplift is due to be removed, and in addition to that, you've got those tax rises, and that means that many people, particularly those on lower incomes, are likely to be worse off over the next year. And I think one of the rabbits out of the hat we may well see is trying to address that issue of the cost of living crisis. There are suggestions that there could be changes to universal credit, that the government might not do a complete U-turn, but might try and taper things so that people in work manage to keep more of their wages than they have done or will do at present.
Thank you very much, Darren. Really good summary, that, really, of everything that we can hopefully, or otherwise, depending on where you sit on this particular fence, expect from our Chancellor Rishi Sunak a bit later today. Darren McCaffrey, there, our political editor, right outside the seats of power. Now, Philip Davies, MP for Shipley in West Yorkshire, does join us now to give his thoughts on net zero ahead of COP26. Thank you very much, Philip. I read with interest, actually, your letter yesterday, and I think, frankly, from a personal perspective, it's about time someone stood up and said it, really. You call the Prime Minister's push for net zero utterly futile virtue signalling. I think potentially some of the people's views on this are unrepeatable at this particular time of day. Why are we doing this? Why are we pressing ahead with this to the extent where actually we know it probably won't work, we know it will probably make a lot of people poorer, and yet we hurtle on head first? Why?
Well, it's a good question. I wish I knew the answer to that question. It just seems to me that, the political class have completely lost the plot over all of this. It's a collective loss of everybody's common sense, to be perfectly honest. Look, of course, everybody, thinks, we should be greener. It sounds like a good thing to do. But when people start realizing the cost of going greener and what's expected of them, I expect there to be a huge backlash to this, particularly when they realize that because of the actions of China and India and emerging economies in Africa, anything we do is going to be completely futile. We're not going to change the world's temperatures by the UK going to net zero. And that's not a matter of opinion. That's just a simple matter of fact, whether it's an inconvenient one or not.
Sure, and I completely agree with you that it obviously has to be collective because we are talking about global temperatures here. But we shouldn't be waiting for the likes of China to take the lead on this. We should be, leading the way on this agenda, should we not? And so actually, it is right, even though we are 1% of global emissions, that we perhaps show other countries, other rich nations who can perhaps put pressure on those other countries that this is how it is done and this is the lead you should be following.
Yeah, and we've been doing that. We've been doing that for 30 years. I mean, over the last 30 years, we've cut our carbon emissions almost in half, by about 40%. We've been leading the way, showing the rest of the world what to do. Have the rest of the world been following us? Has China been following us? No, they're laughing at us, frankly. They're mopping up the industries that we say we no longer want, and they're relocating them to their country and spewing out the sort of carbon emissions from their country and taking all the jobs. It's not making any difference to global temperature. So we've been leading the way for 30 years. At some point, you've got to accept that these other countries are just not going to follow suit. It's just not going to happen. And so, does anybody really, China have said they're going to build 100 new airports over the next decade. So there's absolutely no prospect of them changing what they're doing. So at some point, you've got to accept that this isn't going to happen. And so if you're going to spend money on climate change, the question is, what do you do? Do you spend it on this futile attempt to change the world's temperature, which really, frankly, deep down, we all know isn't going to happen because we know that China, India, emerging economies in Africa aren't going to take the actions to cut their carbon emissions. Their increase in carbon emissions each year is going to be bigger than our total.
Yeah,
so do you do that and continue down that wasting money, or do you spend money on trying to adapt to the changes in the world's climate? And my point is, that is a much more sensible use of money, because if you spend money trying to change the world's temperature, that money will all be wasted because of the actions of other countries. But if you spend money trying to adapt to changes in the world's economy, that money could be well spent.
But let's just get this right. What you're saying there, I'm assuming that as far as you're concerned, you believe that our Prime Minister and presumably our Chancellor already know this. They know that us getting to net zero, if indeed it ever happens, at whatever cost it is, will do nothing to reduce global temperatures. And that's one of the things that I really want to get at, because we do hear a lot about Marcus Rashford's hungry children. We do hear a lot about things going on in this country that could do with a bit of a boost, especially now, in this particular moment as we emerge from the ashes of this pandemic. So really, is our government deliberately wasting money?
Well, this is a matter for the whole political class. They haven't got the courage to stand up to the sort of zealots on Twitter and social media and all of these lunatics blocking the roads and all the rest of it. They haven't got the courage to stand up to them, and that's a failure of the whole political class, in my opinion. I think everybody deep down knows that China, India, and emerging economies in Africa aren't going to take the steps that are needed. And if anyone's got any evidence that they are going down that route, let's have a look at it, because I can't see any evidence that they're going to follow suit. So, yes, you're absolutely right. That my constituents are struggling with the cost of living. They want cheaper energy bills rather than sort of greener energy. And this is sort of it's a very middle class kind of campaign. People who are not struggling to pay the bills, wanting to impose extra costs on families who can't really afford extra bills in order to make them feel virtuous. But what about people who are struggling to pay the bills? I think let's have some cheaper energy bills for people struggling with the cost of living, rather than forcing the bills up deliberately in order to be greener. I just can't justify that.
Yeah, and I think your colleague Steve Baker has also done a lot of work in that area, highlighting the cost of net zero, particularly to poorer families. But just to end, so we have all these policies, don't we? We have that commitment to going net zero by 2050. We have the banning of new sale of new diesel and petrol cars, I think 2030 or 2035, whatever it is. And gas boilers as well, they're going. I'm presuming, is your issue with those policies in principle, or do you just think actually we're rushing towards them? And what policies do you think we should have, if any at all, as part of our green agenda?
Well, I think we should say to other countries around the world that we're not going to take these steps unless you do. We're not going to sort of, in effect, take one for the team in a futile gesture and just export jobs and prosperity to other countries around the world. So I think we need to play a bit more hardball. But if those other countries are not going to do those things, then we should be looking after the best interests of our constituents, and that isn't making them buy new heat pumps and things like that unnecessarily. You know, we should say to other countries that they need to play their part, or else we're not going to do it instead. And I think that, you know, the point I would make, in the 1980s, you know, we had people who believed in unilateral nuclear disarmament that said that, you know, if we get rid of our nuclear weapons, every other country will follow suit. And I thought that was mad then, as did most of the public. Now we've got sort of unilateral green agenda, and it's the same principle. If we do it, everyone else will follow suit. Well, there's absolutely no evidence that all these other countries are going to follow suit. And I think the idea that they will is as unlikely now as it was about the argument for nuclear disarmament in the 1980s.
Yeah, Philip Davies there, thank you very much. Tory MP for Shipley, and I also suspect on the right side of history. There we go, we've got to go to some of your views now.
Yeah, I have to say, I do find him a bit defeatist, because he's just made the point there that if other countries don't necessarily... History shows us that if you do something, if you change a policy like this one, and nuclear disarmament he mentioned there's no proof that other countries necessarily follow suit. But he's also saying, actually, what our climate policy should basically be, we won't do it unless you do it. Well, he's just admitted that nobody's going to follow anybody else. So ultimately, what he's admitting is defeat in terms of not doing anything at all. And I'm not sure that's a position most people have, that they want to do absolutely nothing at all to be greener. I know there are all these extremists, which we talk about all the time.
Yes.
But I find being defeatist quite unhelpful.
No, I get that. I think my takeaway from that was that he actually would like the money that we're spending on this, as he would put it, futile push towards net zero, to be going into actually like finding solutions for the climate crisis. So not trying to lower the temperature through our own actions necessarily, but trying to find new solutions that could help solve it. Look, again, how likely that is. I mean, by definition, those things don't already exist, do they? So I suppose he's either defeatist or a dreamer. You know, either way. There is quite a lot of love for Philip Davies in my inbox at the moment, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Philip Davies is spot on. I've been saying this for 10 years plus, and that's from Bob as well. And lots of this going about, frankly. Boris should stop listening to Carrie and focus on the issues that he can improve and give us all value for money. And that's
I think that's
Malcolm
a cheap
and Carlisle.
shot, which is a very
cheap shot at Carrie there. How dare you, Malcolm?
Yeah. Well, after the break, British spy agencies are using Amazon to store their most classified, sensitive information in a new deal that has been struck. We'll look into some security concerns around this after the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. Well, there's a lot of wet weather to come over the next few days. Through today, we've got some persistent rain across western parts of the UK, and it's windy and mild. And that's all down to this air coming up from the southwest. But we've got this weather front here, and that's becoming pretty persistent through the day today, not moving very quickly, very far. We've got weather warnings in place across northern England through today, but as we go into Thursday, we'll have one in for Wales as well. Let's take a look at where that rain is at the moment then. We've got some pretty heavy rain across southern Scotland and Cumbria. It's just clearing out of Northern Ireland. It's gradually trickling its way slowly southwards. A lot of cloud in the sky elsewhere. A few sunny breaks developing to the east of higher ground through Wednesday afternoon, but with strong winds, it will feel quite gusty around the coastal areas, despite, though, temperatures getting up to 18, that's 64 in Fahrenheit. As we go through Wednesday evening then, we'll continue to see that rain pushing its way slowly southwards, becoming heavier then across northwest Wales and eventually getting into more of Wales as we go into the early hours of Thursday. Again, ahead of it, we'll see a lot of cloud in the sky, another very mild picture over into the early hours of Thursday, but just starting to turn a little bit cooler in the far northwest of Scotland. 9 degrees there in Stornoway, 48 Fahrenheit, compared to 12 degrees there in London. Now, as we go through into Thursday, what have we got on the cards? More in the way of rain across these western areas. It really is going to persist, and I think those totals will start to build up. So expect some surface water flooding on the roads, the risk of some flash flooding as well in places. Do take care if you are planning any journeys. Still dry across southeast England through the day. Some sunshine developing here. A much, much brighter day for Northern Ireland. A few showers coming in across Scotland, and still on the mild side across the board. Now, as we go into the Halloween weekend, it stays fairly unsettled, further strong winds and the risk of some heavy rain at times too. Our temperatures begin to slide away, though, as we go into Sunday. I'll see you very soon. Take care.
Yes, morning everybody. Now, Amazon has struck a deal with 3 of the UK's top spy agencies to host classified material. It's a deal aimed at boosting the use of data analytics and artificial intelligence for espionage.
Yes, Amazon's database cloud system, Amazon Web Services, has been championed and used by services including MI5 and MI6 and governmental departments such as the Ministry of Defence. Before, the contract has already ignited concerns over state sovereignty and security, as a vast amount of the UK's most secret data will be hosted by a single US company.
Yes, well, here to tell us more is Dr. Alan Mendoza, co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, a transatlantic foreign policy and national security think tank based right here in the UK. Some people might say this all looks a little bit sinister.
Well, some people might, but the sad reality is this deal's been done because there is no British capacity currently for storage of data on the level that we have that Amazon can provide. So because we just don't have the capability, we've had to look at alternative suppliers, and as a result, we've gone with the most logical supplier, which is an American company, an allied country at the end of the day. Although of course there'll be some concerns about who's got access to the data, as opposed to going further afield to countries that might not be allies. I mean, you wouldn't want a Chinese company hosting your data, would you?
Definitely not, no.
No, absolutely not. And in a way, I think this is a testament to sort of how good Amazon are at what they do. But some might say they have a monopoly on this area, and many will raise concerns that all of this information will be with a single provider, which, yes, is an ally, but it is a foreign-based company.
Well, obviously, the long-term answer is to try and develop British capabilities on this nature. But what it does show you is the importance now of big data. We hear this term all the time, and the need to analyse it, the need to have sort of machine learning on it, and to work through it as quickly as possible. There's no doubt that the American giants have done this better than anyone. We've been told there will be strict safeguards on how this data can be accessed. All the data will be stored in the UK. So the government has obviously gone through this list. And we are talking about the spy agencies here at the end of the day. I would suspect that if they had a real problem with this, we wouldn't have gone ahead and done it. But it doesn't seem to be the case, judging by what we see in the papers, that there seems to be sort of a relaxed attitude going, the security safeguards are in place. We don't think they can be breached. We're happy to go ahead in that way. And I think we should probably trust their judgment on that one.
Is it just I'm not exactly sure what Jeff Bezos' current role with Amazon is. Is this too much power for one individual? I understand he has quite close links with a lot of the American secret services as well, for example. I mean, he's an incredibly powerful individual, isn't he?
Well, yes. I mean, when you reach, I hate to say, when you reach the level of wealth that Jeff Bezos has achieved, inevitably you're going to have power because your pronouncements can shift markets, your companies can kind of determine global trends. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do in that regard. Again, you're right. I mean, I think Bezos has announced he's either stepped down or he is stepping down from Amazon. But the reality is he will still essentially be the owner of Amazon, and so there's going to be some power there. There is a concern about this, and I think people ought to be looking at who owns these companies and what their own agendas might be. I don't particularly see anything sinister right now in what Bezos is doing, but we've seen in the past with other companies that, if you like, their owners have been able to influence policy decisions. And, most famously, we look at all the social media bans on Donald Trump, for example, to see how this influence can go when nobody else is banned alongside Trump. So there is legitimate danger in this, but I think at the moment we're okay with Jeff Bezos.
Well, Dr. Alan Mendoza, thank you for joining us this morning, co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society.
What an office, by the way.
One of my favourite facts ever.
I don't think enough gets spoken about that. Sorry to interrupt you, but can we just appreciate Alan's office?
I didn't actually notice.
You know, I hope that's not a green screen.
I was listening to what he was saying.
Towering over London.
One of my favourite fun facts, which I had to double check when I heard this because it's so unbelievable, is if you were given £100,000 every single day from the day Jesus was born, you still wouldn't be as rich as Jeff Bezos.
I do like the...
So if you were given £100,000 every day for about 2,000 years, that's insane. I had to double check that, and it was true.
Yeah. I mean, he remained the world's richest man after he divorced his wife, which I think is jolly good by anyone's standards, isn't it, to be fair? So, in a way, well done, Jeff. Right, moving on now. We're going to be going to my inbox, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Quite a lot of love, it must be said, for Philip Davies MP, who wrote a letter calling Boris Johnson's big green agenda essentially a futile attempt at virtue signalling that will bankrupt the country. At last, someone talking sense. Spending money on adapting to higher temperatures is sensible. As far as I know, there's no consensus on how much human activity is contributing to the temperature rise. That's Duncan's view. And this has really got you going, actually, in the inbox.
I think there is a consensus, largely speaking, that we have contributed quite considerably to that human activity.
Not as much as the cows.
Well, apparently so, but they're giving back with their cow poo powered batteries
If you are just joining us, we did a feature on. Yeah, I know. We did a feature on cow patteries, which is essentially, I think, the way of the cows repaying all the damage they've done.
Yeah, cow poo powered batteries apparently are the future. A cow, another fun fact, which we said earlier, a single cow's yearly poo could power 3 households per year, apparently, if we harnessed the power of their poo, basically.
Well, if you listen closely, you can just hear the bottom of a barrel being scraped as well. But anyway, look, thank you very much, everyone who's been tuning in and been messaging in as well. GBViews at GBNews.uk. That is it from us today. We're finishing early, so you can watch the budget announcement coming up soon right here on GB News.
Yes, we'll be taking you inside the Commons to hear from Rishi Sunak himself after this short news update.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is on his way to the Commons, where he'll deliver his autumn budget this afternoon. Rising wages, more NHS funding and regional transport investment are expected to feature. Rishi Sunak will announce a stronger UK economy of the future. NHS Test and Trace has failed its main objective to enable people to return to normal, and it risks wasting public money. That's according to MPs. Well, they have produced a report. The Public Accounts Committee say despite investing £37 billion on Test and Trace, it hasn't worked. They report that only 14% of lateral flow tests sent out reported their results. The Queen has decided not to attend the COP26 climate change summit. The monarch is following medical advice to rest and carry out only light duties, according to the palace statement, though she remains in good spirits. Queen Elizabeth will now record a video speech later this week that will be played at the conference. The palace spokesman said Her Majesty is disappointed not to attend the reception. More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters will be sent out this week inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs for this age group through the National Booking Service at local sites. 32 people have now been arrested after Insulate Britain protesters blocked roads on the M25. Kent police say motorists will still encounter some disruption. The final few protesters on the A40 near North Acton have also been arrested. Eco-protester Mark Coleman is urging the Prime Minister to fix what he calls a housing insulation crisis. You are right up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with more. Stay up to date here, though, with the budget. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, very good morning to you. Well, there's a lot of wet weather to come over the next few days. Through today, we've got some persistent rain across western parts of the UK, and it's windy and mild. And that's all down to this air coming up from the southwest. But we've got this weather front here, and that's becoming pretty persistent through the day today, not moving very quickly, very far. We've got weather warnings in place across northern England through today, but as we go into Thursday, we'll have one in for Wales as well. Let's take a look at where that rain is at the moment then. We've got some pretty heavy rain across southern Scotland and Cumbria. It's just clearing out of Northern Ireland. It's gradually trickling its way slowly southwards. A lot of cloud in the sky elsewhere. A few sunny breaks developing to the east of higher ground through Wednesday afternoon, but with strong winds, it will feel quite gusty around the coastal areas, despite, though, temperatures getting up to 18, that's 64 in Fahrenheit. As we go through Wednesday evening then, we'll continue to see that rain pushing its way slowly southwards, becoming heavier then across northwest Wales and eventually getting into more of Wales as we go into the early hours of Thursday. Again, ahead of it, we'll see a lot of cloud in the sky, another very mild picture over into the early hours of Thursday, but just starting to turn a little bit cooler in the far northwest of Scotland, 9 degrees there in Stornoway, 48 Fahrenheit, compared to 12 degrees there in London. Now, as we go through into Thursday, what have we got on the cards? More in the way of rain across these western areas. It really is going to persist, and I think those totals will start to build up. So expect some surface water flooding on the roads, the risk of some flash flooding as well in places. Do take care if you are planning any journeys. Still dry across southeast England through the day. Some sunshine developing here. A much, much brighter day for Northern Ireland. A few showers coming in across Scotland, and still on the mild side across the board. Now, as we go into the Halloween weekend, it stays fairly unsettled, further strong winds and the risk of some heavy rain at times too. Our temperatures begin to slide away, though, as we go into Sunday. I'll see you very soon. Take care.